Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Decentralized Revolution, a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. I'm Aaron Harris and I'm your host. Before we get into our conversation with my guest today, I want to pass along something that Gene Epstein asked me to share with you. Of course, Gene hosts the Soho Forum debate series. He's got one coming up later here in January, simply called End the Fed ? So we know which side of things that those of us in the Mises Caucus fall in that debate. And on that side of the fence will be Lawrence White. He's a professor of economics at George Mason University. And arguing on behalf of the Federal Reserve is Frederick Mishkin. He's a banking and finance professor at Columbia University. So that's going to take place on Thursday, January 22nd. If you go to the Soho Forum website, which is rather easy to find, you can find out information about if you want to go there in person and when that's going to be broadcast and such. So please do that. And I'm going to try to have Gene on sometime in the next couple of months to catch up anyway. We just talked to him a couple of weeks ago on New Year's Day as part of our live stream, our New Year's Day live stream in support of Project Decentralized Revolution. He was on with Murray Sabrin in his segment. We had many, many others. So that is up on our Facebook and YouTube pages as well, if you want to check that out. And my guest today is Thomas Eddlem. We're going to bring him on in a second. He is a fairly newly elected chair of the Libertarian Party in Massachusetts. He stepped up to kind of help stabilize things during a time coming out of some instability, to say the least. And we're glad that he is involved and doing what he can to help the Libertarian Party. He recently wrote a couple of pretty interesting articles that I wanted to have him on to talk about. So let's say hi to Thomas Eddlem. All right, my guest today is Tom Eddlem. Tom, how you doing today?
Doing great, Aaron. I'm excited about the opportunities within the Libertarian Party and with, generally speaking, politically, for the opportunity to roll back some of the political censorship that's been taking place on social media.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about. And you've got before we get into that, I want to let people kind of know where you're coming from, your history in the movement. I first became aware of you, I think 3+ years ago or so, when a book came out by the title No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg. Scott Horton put that out at the Libertarian Institute, and you wrote the foreword to that book. So that might be a good way for you to start. What was your relationship to Will and the rest of your history in the movement and where you are right now?
Sure. Will and I go back to the early 1990s. We were both on the staff of the New American Magazine, which is a magazine of the John Birch Society. I left the staff of the magazine in the year 2000 to move back to Boston, the Boston area. I'm south of Boston. That's where I grew up, and I wanted to come back here. Maybe you can tell that from my accent. And Will left a few years later, but I did write the foreword to a couple of his books. And so that was my relationship with Will. We continued to be friends until he unfortunately passed on in 2017. It's hard to believe it's almost 6 years. Since then, I've written for a number of publications, but right now, mostly what I write for is the Libertarian Institute and the Massachusetts Libertarian Party's blog. I'm currently the state party chair. I hope only temporarily. I want to be. I love being the communications director, but I hate being the state party chair because I have to deal with a lot more stuff. And for me, the communications part is the more fun part of it. But that's basically where I'm at.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for stepping up there, Massachusetts. We won't go into all the details of the saga that you guys have been through over the last year or so. We've mentioned it here and there, and
right.
To step up and sort of help right the ship. Our man Brody, who's on our board, is over there in Massachusetts. So between you guys and the rest of your crew, thanks for locking things down for us. And so you published them on the LP Massachusetts website, a couple of different pieces, which I'm going to link to on the show notes page at decentralizedrevolution.com/96. And we'll just kind of jump into it by referring to your latest one that came out, I think, Monday, January 9th or Tuesday, January 10th. It's called How Successful Has FBI CIA Recruiting Been Within the Libertarian Movement? So it's a pretty provocative title. Some people from some quarters are going to roll their eyes at that, but it's a really well-written article. So is the other one I read. So what are we talking about there? Is this something like that really going on?
Yeah, I mean, Libertarian Party and Libertarian movement is not unique in that way. I'm not saying that the CIA and the FBI are focusing upon the Libertarian Party movement, but we are among the groups that they're trying to co-opt globally. And I provide some evidence of it. Certainly, I provide evidence of the CIA trying to recruit globally within the Libertarian movement. I don't know if they've been successful. I gave two examples, one in Russia and one in Venezuela, where the National Endowment for Democracy has been throwing tons of money around. But in the United States, certainly the Libertarian movement has been co-opted, at least in part, by FBI media censorship. And the highlight of the piece was John Samples of the Cato Institute. He is the vice president of the Cato Institute and their Center for, I forget what it's called.
Center for Representative Government.
Yes, and it focuses on the First Amendment. And yet he's on Facebook's appeals board, basically, making the final decisions on social media censorship. Now, even if he was on the board and he was saying, no, don't censor every single time, that wouldn't be enough. He would have to, because of what he wrote and said in interviews, he wrote and said that this was, these guys on Facebook censorship board were basically libertarians, and that it's about a private company making private decisions. And from what we know of the Twitter files, it's not at all a private company making those decisions. It's the FBI and the CIA and sometimes the CDC and other groups going through the FBI funnel, demanding that certain posts be taken down and having them taken down on multiple platforms, often on the same day, but not always, because the procedure of doing it is a little bit different. And it doesn't matter whether it's Twitter or Facebook or Google or Reddit or half a dozen other social media giants. It's all being done and coordinated by the FBI. And John Samples is on the Facebook appeal board saying, oh, it's just a private company. Well, we know it's not. He's been lying to the Liberty Movement at least since he went on the Facebook board in 2020, because there's no way to disguise the fact that these are government requests. And to be making a public face of, oh, well, this is just a private company making private decisions, that's fundamentally dishonest.
Yeah. And that was kind of what struck me about in the article, is that he was, I think when he was making these, hey, it's a private company, bro, comments, like that would have been the time to disclose, like, was he on the board? Like, how long was he on this board? And was he on the board when he started making those comments? I think in 2017 or 2018. Did that happen? Did they invite him on after that, or was he already on?
It was after. He joined the board in, I want to say, I think I put it into the article. I think it was, by the way, the article is on lpofma.org.
Yeah.
That's the Massachusetts State Libertarian Party website. I think it was May or June of 2020. So, okay. All right, you could argue, hey, he didn't know in 2018, because I start out with a citation of him saying, oh, it's a private company in 2018, and they are allowed to make their decisions, specifically regarding Alex Jones being deplatformed by a whole host of different social media sites. And I also put my own Facebook post up there where I said, well, this is clearly government coordination. I could tell, I could read the pattern. And you could say, well, he was just dumb. But after 2020, when he's on the Facebook appeals board, no. And this is a consistent narrative. He has written this a number of times and done this consistently in interviews over that time, including right up until just a couple months before Elon Musk released all the Twitter files and revealed publicly through some great reporters like Matt Taibbi that this is not a private company making private decisions for itself. This is a private company succumbing to heavy government pressure.
Yeah.
And, with the threats of ever heavier regulation and sanctions. And that's what it's about. And he knew that.
Yeah.
At least by the end of 2020.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I actually interned at the Cato Institute, like way back in 1996. And, looking back, I kind of see some of the seeds of what's going on now, but it was much more solid. Their foreign policy division is still pretty solid, but
Doug Bandow is great.
Yeah. And Ted, Ted Carpenter,
right.
It's only a matter of time. Hopefully not, but you wonder why they're still around.
Well, they've been around so long. I mean, they've been around since the 80s, I think.
Yeah, both of those guys were there for several years before I was there. I did help Doug with one little thing when I was there, but I remember having one long conversation with him. But this John Samples, so he's Cato's vice president at the Cato Institute. The two other big things on his resume are the director of the Georgetown University Press, and anybody knows anything about Georgetown University and its relationship to the intelligence community is that's a little suspect there. And then he was also at this place called, I guess it used to be called the 20th Century Foundation. Now it's just called the Century Foundation, and it's a progressive independent think tank that conducts research, yada, yada, to pursue all kinds of different equity and things. So like the fact that this guy is a vice president of an organization that Murray Rothbard was at, it's just like what's going on here? I mean, that obviously it's one of those things where if it's not the FBI and CIA actually sort of placing people, like if they were like, if this, and he's not speaking about him individually, I guess, but some of these people, some of these resumes, it's like, well, if they were sort of a plant from the deep state, like how would they be any different if they are or they are not, right? It's they're doing exactly what they would be doing if they in fact were that. So yeah, and I just, it blows my mind that somebody like that could be that high up at Cato, but then to have that connection at Twitter and not
Facebook, yes.
Facebook. Yeah. Well, it's all the same thing, but
more or less.
But yeah. So let's talk, what do you know about, like, I know a lot of libertarians have been saying this for a while, and I haven't read all of the Twitter files, but has there been anything in there, or what do you know about sort of the state's involvement in the early days of Facebook and Twitter and all, and Google? They've kind of been almost in on the ground floor with most of those places, haven't they?
I think this, for the most part, it's been late arrival. That's the the main theme from Taibbi and Barry Weiss and some of the others is that there was probably some influence back around 2010, which was fairly long after they've been created, but really the influence of the FBI and its surrogates, the CIA and the State Department and other places, ramped up in 2016. Okay. And they were trying to get Trump unelected, and at first it didn't work, and then in 2020, they made sure that it did. But for me, the point of the piece is not to go after John Samples It's to sort of paint a broad picture and say, okay, we've got this censorship going on. How can we identify these agents in place and people, people being recruited and how they're being recruited, and try to avoid that in the liberty movement? And then also, how do we roll it back? And for me, the way to roll it back is to look at patterns and try to get defectors. That's the way to do it. We need more people like Ed Snowden. We need more websites like WikiLeaks under Julian Assange. And we need to basically start looking at, okay, well, what is the CIA? Where do they recruit? Well, preferably they recruit Ivy League people, as they always have. I mean, going back to Bill Buckley's days, William F. Buckley was he tried to run the conservative movement, and he was a CIA officer for several years, and probably for many years later as well, at the helm of National Review. And he brought in a bunch of his friends from the CIA to run the magazine. And we have to look for patterns like that. And I'm not trying to just go after the Cato Institute or another libertarian institution. What I'm saying is, let's try to get some more defectors. Let's try to roll this thing back. Let's try to open it up. Because one of the things we found is, in Elon Musk's case, he could just buy the whole company and open up, and we can find out, okay, exactly what's going on at Twitter, and by implication, what's going on at all of the other major tech companies.
Yep.
But the overlapping narratives that the government was pushing are also being repeated by major news media. They're being repeated by major politicians, by certain businessmen. So we can look at those and start identifying, okay, who's maybe an asset, and maybe get them to come out. Or maybe I don't want to run a, how do I put it, like a McCarthyite scandal. You are you now, or have you ever been?
Right.
But let's face it, the CIA's campaign right now is far more dangerous than the KGB's was in the 1940s and 50s.
Right.
Because they're actually actively enslaving us, and they've gotten a lot further than the KGB ever did.
Right. Yeah, and it's for domestic political control, not to subvert. The KGB is trying to subvert an enemy, and presumably, they just wanted to bring down the government and then go to work on the American people. But like, you're exactly right. You mentioned it in the piece. It's like, this effort is to suppress dissent and control behavior here at home. And like in your articles, and just looking at sort of the narrative, and think of all the headlines of the stuff we've been through as a country since 2016. And I think the three big threads, and two of them are really the same thread, and that's the whole Donald Trump presidency, and now the Ukraine thing. Like, it's amazing to me that people still aren't putting together all the pieces of the Putin, Trump, Russia, Ukraine nonsense. Like the fact that, the effort to get rid of Trump was the completely 100% fabricated Russiagate thing. And he was almost impeached for not selling weapons to Ukraine. And now, it's a complete coincidence that Russia invaded Ukraine, and we want to sell more weapons to them. So there's that whole thread, and then the COVID thread, which obviously, so I think that's ominous to me, is that it's not just because, again, I'm a Gen Xer. I kind of grew up being a fan of Bill Buckley for a while until I discovered Murray Rothbard. And then I realized kind of what the conservative movement was, which was something to prop up the Cold War, and to, basically it was to talk about freedom here at home. Oh, we're defending freedom here at home, so therefore we have to fight the Russians, and that means giving lots of money to the defense contractors. And so that's always kind of been, the dynamic in our lifetimes. But now that sort of, that team has turned their eyes inward to us. And, I think the the COVID thing was kind of a dress rehearsal for what all can we get away with. And so you're right. It is very important that as we, as a party and a small L liberty movement, start to call some of this stuff out, even though we're not, I mean, we're a pretty small band of dissenters at this point, but the fact that we're standing up on these things means they're going to take a look at us. And, like you said, I don't think there are, there's a CIA guy at every LP meeting, like there used to be an FBI informant or two at every Klan meeting back in the whatever. But I think it is serious because we're one of the few institutions that is growing and sort of speaking out against the things that are quite obviously the state's priorities right now.
Right. I mean, the FBI is recruiting us domestically and internationally not because we're a threat to the regime, but we are a potential threat. We could continue to grow and threaten the regime. And, by highlighting the fact that, the CIA has been engaging in regime change coups across the world, overturning democratically elected governments in 20, or at least trying to, in more than 20 nations since its founding, in most cases trying to replace them with a dictatorship, and in most cases successfully replacing them with a dictatorship. By pointing this out, we destroy their narrative, and we also are trying to ruin. Basically, they're one of the themes that William Norman Grigg used to write about is that the American government, like the Roman government, would practice some heinous thing on other countries abroad, only to bring it back home eventually. And that's basically what they're doing. That's basically what they're doing right now. They practiced CIA regime change and controlling media abroad. Now they're trying it domestically as well.
So you mentioned, and I want to get into what they're doing abroad with the Liberty movement, but to address something you said is to look at patterns. I think libertarians are really good at looking at patterns, almost too good sometimes. But as far as defectors, now, of course, you mentioned Snowden and Assange. Like, how do we encourage that, given what those guys and others like them have gone through? The fact that we don't really have many resources to protect them or anything, is it just that, putting it out there that will amplify anybody who does step away from that and expose what's going on? Can we do more than that?
Yeah, that's a two-part question. The first part is, what can we do? We can encourage them. Yes. And individually, if we know somebody that has been using the government narrative, and maybe, who knows, maybe they're feeling uncomfortable with it. Maybe we can urge them to come out. So, I mean, yes, that's basically what our role is, because the only place they can come out to is the public, the media, whether it's us or an honest reporter like Matt Taibbi or Glenn Greenwald or Scott Horton, or some other very public place. Now, the second part of your question is, there's a risk. Look, you want everybody to be like Julian Assange and Ed Snowden, and look what's happened to them. Julian Assange is in prison and Ed Snowden is in exile. And my basic response is, I think it depends on where they are. Someone who is just casually recruited by the CIA and says no, well, there's not going to be any criminal repercussions for that if you go public with it. There's no way they could put you in prison for that. However, if you are a CIA agent and working for them full time on salary and all the rest, yeah, it's much more difficult, and you do put yourself in risk of going to prison. So we encourage them to go to something like WikiLeaks, and we should probably research a good possibility where they could get away from that, where they could get away from prosecution and do so anonymously, as Chelsea Manning almost did.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really daunting to think about, what they went through, and I'm sure there are many other people who tried to do the same thing, and we don't know their names for one reason or another. And so it is very serious. I mean, if anybody doubts uh, kind of what we're saying about the state, just look at the lengths they go to protect anybody who brings any information out that makes them look bad at all. I mean, uh, yeah, I think it's very deadly serious what's going on, and that's why within the Mises Caucus and uh, libertarians I know, like we're always encouraging and warning each other to be careful of who and what you say where. That's why our emphasis is always on, peaceful political action. We're not going to take the bait of that so many people take to get drawn into something more nefarious that could get us in trouble, because that's not what we believe in. So, but it is something we have to be very cognizant of. Even though we're pretty small potatoes at this point, they are looking at things, and one of your evidence for that is what they're doing with libertarians and liberty movements in other countries. So why don't you talk about one or two more of those examples that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I don't know that I can't say, oh, so and so is a CIA agent in any other country for sure, but I can look at the patterns. There was this young journalism student at Moscow State University, Vera. I kept trying to remember her name, but she was working as an intern at the Voice of America, which is our official propaganda agency, and of course, officially, Voice of America has nothing to do with the CIA, but in reality, it has a lot to do with the CIA. In fact, it hosted one of the CIA's torture prisons in Thailand back in the early 2000s. And she joins the Libertarian Party of Russia, which was only founded in 2009. It's a tiny group, and runs for city council in Moscow, which is a huge city council. It's 1,502 people.
No.
And she won election. And the next year, all of a sudden, she's winning a democracy award from the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA front, and the region that is of the NED is run by a former CIA agent, and I don't know. There are a lot of there's no doubt in my mind that even though the Russian Libertarian Party was a tiny party, less than 1,000 members, they recruited this young woman. I mean, they recruited her. Now, she might have said no. I don't know if she said no, but they were definitely recruiting her, because you don't create all of this this fuss about bringing a 20-year-old young woman all the way to Washington, D.C. to get an award for nothing, and right in the midst of the this sort of CIA nest. It's just like the School of Americas was our school for dictators, where we recruited CIA agents who later became dictators, like Manuel Noriega or General Al-Sisi, who's now the dictator in Egypt. The NED recruits Democratic leaders and for the CIA. So, I mean, and she's gone on to do lots of things in the libertarian movement globally. She's even come to a couple of conferences in the United States for, I don't know if it's Young Americans for Liberty or Young Americans for Freedom. It was an established, reputable group. And why wouldn't they invite her?
Right.
Because we don't know if she's CIA, and much of the stuff that she's done is commendable, and I would agree with. But if they're controlling the narrative at key points, just as they were with John Samples, we're still going to lose. if and of course, she's on the like the Massachusetts Libertarian Party in 2021, or I should say in 2022, the Russian Communist Party, Russian Libertarian Party in 2020 split in two, and she's on the faction that's now accusing the Massachusetts Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus and the National U.S. Libertarian Party of being Russian assets.
Right.
And is she involved in that? I don't know. Because she is in her office in London, and she may be totally distanced from it, and she's just on the board and not especially active in the group. And she's busy with her English work at the Adam Smith Institute and other groups that she's at. So I don't know, but we need to look at this. And she's one of the ones that we need to encourage. Hey, come out. Tell us what the CIA did.
Yep.
If I were in the British or the Russian Libertarian Party, I would be saying to her, come on, come out. Tell us what they did. Tell us they wanted to recruit you. Tell us how they did it so that we can warn others. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
But I don't know her, and I presume she speaks English now. But I'm not going to go to her. And besides, my article might be taken as a direct attack on her, which I don't mean it to be.
Right. No, I think that's kind of the you kind of have disclaimers in there that like, hey, we don't know if any of these people are acting on behalf of the state or not. But I think that what makes it tricky is there is this divide among libertarians, and in a lot of cases, it is an honest disagreement of sort of strategy or values, which I think kind of you can sum it up in, and I'll let you kind of talk about the differences between the two, which is on one hand, the Mises caucus and kind of the more Rothbardian, at least Rothbard in his later years. But to be fair, Rothbard was never really a universalist in philosophically maybe, but he never talked about, using the army to liberate the world. So like on our side of things, our strategy is hyper local, wanting to have as many states as we can, hopefully on down to where every person, we don't need a one state or two state solution. We need a 7 billion state solution. That's what we're going for, radical decentralization. But kind of some of the people who don't like us much in the Libertarian Party are very much sort of universalists, that they think that we have to be on this crusade to set the world free in our lifetimes, which, to paraphrase Murray Rothbard, like if there was a button on my desk where I could push that and make that happen, I would do that. But realistically, if you are a universalist in today's day and age as a libertarian, that puts you in a kind of a uncomfortable position if you look at how the world actually operates.
Right. I mean, we should be universalists in the sense of we want to set the example for the rest of the world, but not in the sense of, oh, well, we need to send our army or our dollars through taxation abroad to, by force, liberate another country. Absolutely. And that is one of the differences. But I mean, it's not just that. I mean, there's in many respects how do I put it? A theme of many of the same people who are backing military aid to Ukraine are also the ones who are saying, well, the mask mandates are justifiable. Well, the vaccine mandates were justifiable. The lockdowns were justifiable. That, and a whole host of other issues. Now, that doesn't mean they're FBI or CIA assets. It doesn't mean it at all. But it at least means they're not thinking independently.
Yeah.
And they're going along with whatever the media narrative of the moment is. And we need to be cognizant of that and look to people who, we're against the lockdowns from the beginning. We're against the mask mandates from the beginning. We're against all of those things from the beginning. and compare people's records. Now that we have the Twitter files, we have this wonderful silhouette of what the government wanted. And we match people's policies up against that silhouette and see how much conformity there was and how much heterodoxy there was. Mm-hmm. And I'm more inclined to trust those who are heterodox to the government view.
Yep.
And I think people should be, because it shows independence of thought.
Yep. And I think that one of my theses about all this has been, based on my 12 years plus being involved with the Libertarian Party, is that a significant number of people, especially pre-Mises Caucus, it always struck me as like that politics was kind of a hobby for them. Not that they weren't sincere and weren't working hard and don't actually believe these things, but it sort of filled the role of what like a hobby would be for other people. And that a lot of those people, again, very good-hearted people, but I think they tended to approach things from a very, to use an overused image, a blue-pilled perspective. It's almost like they think this is like high school civics class. I don't know if you're high school or whatever, they had like, Model UN or Boys State, where they go, all the smart kids who want to do that go and they pretend to be the UN for a weekend and they solve some problem and they hand out awards. And it seems like a lot of people in our party, especially before the Mises Caucus started organizing, I kind of got that energy from a lot of them. They think, oh, if we're respectable, if we dress the right way, if we say the right things, if we, send out press releases, they'll eventually let us in the debates, and, the media will start paying attention to us, and our ideas have more merit. So therefore we'll win, So I think that if a significant number of people sort of have that attitude, that they are very susceptible to a government narrative, because again, there's a big streak of, hey, we're going to play by the rules and we're going to win, but they're playing by the rules that the state is setting. They're not willing to be unconventional and try something different, like the hyperlocal decentralization. So that's why I think you're right on there. If you do look, if people are always sort of falling, the same people are inclining in favor of the state over and over on 3 or 4 different issues, that tells us something about their mindset at the very least.
Yeah, I think there is a sort of establishment paradigm that a lot of people adopt. I remember going home from the Reno convention in May, and I ran across some very nice people from, I think it was New York, delegates from New York. And they were like, the most important thing for me, because we were still battling over whether or not we would be the delegates or the alternative group that tried to cheat their way into Reno. He said that I don't care about whether you're right or wrong. I want to care about whether or not you get ballot access for the presidential election. And I'm thinking, to what end? Mm-hmm. We're not going to elect a president. I mean, why are you thinking in those terms? It's as if they are reading the New York Times or whatever and think that the establishment is ever going to warm up to us. They're not. Yeah. And especially, we know that especially now that the Twitter files have come out. What we need to do is, as you said, do work locally. Sure, we're going to have to get ballot access, and in Massachusetts, we'll get ballot access because we want our national candidates for the president and the vice president to be able to come to Massachusetts and say, I'm on the ballot and vote for me. But on the priority scale, that should not be the number one overriding task that we need to complete. Right. Because it's the president is not, even if we elected a president and nothing else, that would do nothing. They wouldn't be able to change it. They would be impeached. They would be obfuscated. It's not the presidency that we need to change. Ultimately, if we're going to decentralize, certainly Congress would have to defund everything. I mean, it wouldn't be the presidency.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that I'm glad you brought that up about ballot access, because it's one of those things I think some people accuse us of not caring about that in the Mises Caucus. And I don't think that's true at all. It's just not our number one goal,
Right.
because again, I was chairman of the state central committee in Ohio for a little while back in the last decade, and involved there from pretty heavily from around 2010 to 2016, 17. And the amount of time and money and legal hearings, and I could, it's like it's a Kafka novel and a farce altogether, how much the state kept us on that hamster wheel of trying to get on the ballot. Oh, well, you did that. You got those signatures. Oh, you filled out the form wrong. You spent all this money to do that. Well, now we're going to change the rules. So I think we fall prey to that by saying, oh, ballot access is our number one thing.
Right.
Then they just throw more roadblocks out there. We spend all the money, and that there's no better way to dishearten political activists than by giving them a task with against long odds with very little payoff. And no wonder we can't grow this party, because okay, all you're going to do is get signatures to try to get on the ballot, and then do it all again in 2 or 4 years. So I think we should do everything we can, but like, if that precludes us from actually building a grassroots movement, getting candidates elected at the local level, like I think we really got to examine our priorities and go for fight some of the battles that we can actually win.
Well, that's it. I mean, the presidential election, even if we could win it, isn't going to do anything, because the system is rigged from the bottom. Let me give you an example from Massachusetts a few years ago. There was a guy named Ed Pollack who, after the Massachusetts Supreme Court declared that marriage could be between, 2 women or 2 men, and it doesn't matter what your position is on that issue, he got enough signatures to get it on the ballot, and it was denied. They said, nope, you can't go on the ballot. So a couple of years later, the Catholic Church here in Massachusetts said, yeah, but we're going to get a lot of signatures, and they won't dare do it to us again. So they spent, I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars. They got twice as many signatures as were needed, and it didn't go on the ballot. Yep. So, I mean, the system is rigged. We need to have that grassroots movement and the support from underneath in order to get to the top. And with ideas like nullification, we don't even have to get to the top. We can just start taking down the government by non-compliance.
Yep.
I mean, I'm here from Massachusetts. Gee, we're the heart of Henry David Thoreau and civil disobedience. We should be leading by example on that level, and that's what we want to bring here in Massachusetts. And I know the Mises guys do as well. I've always been friendly with the Mises guys. Someone used to ask me, especially during the controversy leading up to Reno, are you Mises? And I said, well, I'm more Mises than Mises, but I like the Mises guys. And I actually recently I donated a couple $100, I think, to the Mises Caucus. More on a dare, though. I was Archie Flowers. Started calling me Mises, and I said, you know what? If you call me Mises one more time, I'm going to donate $25 to the Mises Caucus. And I ended up donating over $200 to the Mises Caucus every time he said it. I'd post a little receipt. So I don't know. I may not financially recover from this if he keeps using it.
I'm going to make a fake Twitter account in his name and start talking trash about you, so I can. But no, I'm really glad that someone is kind of looking at the big picture on this stuff. Is there what else is there in the Twitter files that libertarians should be aware of? Was there anything that surprised you? I've been meaning to go through and actually read all of them systematically rather than kind of just glancing at here and there. So what's been your overall take on all that?
I don't know if I was surprised by anything. I mean, that's the dig at it. Oh, they didn't tell us anything we didn't already know. And, we all suspected it, but now it's beyond any question. What I would like to see is the very most recent Twitter files the Twitter files from 2022. What was the FBI and the CIA and the State Department telling Twitter to censor about Ukraine? Because that's still a big issue, and I haven't seen that yet. Maybe I missed it. I have so many things I have to do. A full-time job, and I've got kids and grandkids and all the rest. But I'd like to see that.
Yeah. It is the rabbit hole, I think, can go pretty deep. What's your take on Elon Musk? I always enjoy hearing people's take on him because there's so many different ways to look at him.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a corporate welfare queen. He's taken billions of dollars in government subsidies. But has he lobbied for them? It's one thing to take advantage of the programs as they exist, and it's another thing to say, oh, I have these programs like, Northrop Grumman or whatever, and say, oh, well, give us more and make more laws to give us more money. I don't think he's done that. I don't trust him, but I love what he's done with the Twitter files. I mean, he's opened the veil in a way that, we as a decentralized revolution never could have on our own, nor could any single defector, because he opened the whole vault of Twitter. And it's not every social media company, but it, by implication, we can impute what they did with all of the other social media companies, as I did in my piece about Facebook and John Samples. So I think it's wonderful what we've done. I don't want to expect too much from him going forward. In fact, I was disappointed to hear today that Scott Horton's Twitter account had been suspended.
No, I didn't hear that either. That's horrible.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe he said something in anger on Twitter, but I don't think so. I mean, the Scott Horton show is as vanilla an anti-war show as possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just him interviewing someone. I've done a couple of them myself.
Yeah.
And he just, he gives his opinions, but he lets his guests speak. And if he disagrees with them, he lets them speak, and then he says why he disagrees. I don't understand why he would be censored by Twitter. We'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a rational explanation for it, or maybe it's censor leftovers. Who knows?
Yeah. We'll see. And sometimes all it takes is a complaint he always tells the story of Peter Van Buren got kicked off of Twitter for supposedly threatening somebody. He said to somebody, "I hope a zombie eats your face," which is obviously a joke and maybe not a very nice thing to say, but this guy complained, and I actually went to grad school with the guy who complained and got him kicked off, got Peter Van Buren kicked off. And if you would have, and this guy is a real piece of work, and it doesn't surprise me at all that an establishment media hack, I went to journalism school, that
I'm sorry.
He's right out of central casting as far as what you would expect from a regime reporter, and is exactly the type of person who would go tattletale knowing that he's being disingenuous. So it could be something like that, and hopefully he'll get back on there. But we probably better wrap it up here. I've taken a lot of your time, but what else, give you a chance to, what else interests you that you're thinking about writing about as libertarians? What should we be paying attention to here in the beginning of 2023?
Well, I mean, you absolutely want to pay attention to the Federal Reserve and inflation. That's one of my key focuses. And most of my writing at the Libertarian Institute is about that. I went back to grad school in 2019 and got my master's in applied economics. So I've been basically trying to, Walter Block would be so disappointed in me, trying to empirically show that the free market is validated by the data. And, there's sort of the, how do I say, I'm almost an Austrian empiricist. Not really, because I know you cannot prove like you can prove a scientific thing economically, but the data coincides with the Austrian theory, and that's basically what I've been trying to show, because the Keynesian theses, almost all of them, are based upon really bad data analysis.
Yeah.
And so I've been focusing upon that, especially inflation. And my particular focus has been also that inflation is the most regressive tax, that the poorer you are, the more it hurts you.
Oh, yeah.
And the richer you are, the less it hurts you. Because the rich people have assets that are basically inflation immune. And the poor man, he has to advance, inflation hurts creditors and helps debtors. Well, the poor man is, if he's working, he's a creditor. He's crediting his worker with his wages. He's crediting his landlord with his rent, and he's crediting his bank with his wages when he deposits it, and on and on. So it's the most regressive tax. And I'm not trying to appeal always to the left, but I like the Horton rule. Appeal to the left from the left and the right from the right. So that's where I'm going.
Well, let's talk about that for just 1 second then. And I always love asking these questions, because every time I ask a question, you get a different answer, because you can't know the future. But I have been saying, a lot of us have been saying for the last few years, that the crash is coming, and we're finally right about inflation.
Right.
But where do you see this all going? It seems like the Fed's been sort of, I don't know, blowing up the balloon, walking the tightrope, whatever, and something's got to give.
Yeah, I mean, I'm both a fan and a critic of Peter Schiff. He's always saying the crash is coming, and eventually, of course, you're right. But his economic analysis is good. I think the only criticism I would give is that the market corrects a lot of things, and the growth in population and production allows for the production of more money without prices appearing to go up. I mean, they, compared to what they would have done, they're going up. But if you want my prediction for the future, I think 2023 is going to be pretty high inflation, and then after that, by the CPI measure, that is, because the inflation took place in 2020 and 2021, and the increase in currency, and since late 22, it's actually they've actually cut the level of M2 a bit. So I think this is probably our last year of high inflation. I think it might be higher than last year, and then it'll trickle off as far as the CPI goes, because M2 has usually been the measure of how much the CPI will increase, how much consumer prices will increase. Whereas if you have low interest rates and easy credit, well, that tends to inflate the prices of assets that are purchased on debt, like real estate and stocks and other things. And that's why we had this big stock market bubble, and we continue to have a stock market bubble, in my view, because the real interest rate remains deeply negative. It's not as negative as it once was, but it's still deeply negative. And as we increase that, I don't see a crash like 2009. The dynamics in the housing market are different. You've got a lot of, although housing prices are falling, you've got underlying inflation that's going to keep the nominal prices up some compared to 2008 and 9. And then also you've got people who are locked into fixed interest rates, and the value of their mortgages are going to get easier and easier to pay rather than more difficult, just because of inflation. So they're not going to want to give up those low interest rates. I'll give you an example. I work with a Venezuelan guy who said, he was told in 2008, or maybe it was 2007. I think it was 2007. You got to buy a house. You got to buy a house. Inflation's coming. So he bought a house for 250,000 bolivars, which in American currency, it's like, at the time, it was probably $25,000. So, the value of property is much less in Venezuela. And his mortgage payment was a little over 1,000 bolivars, so like over $100 a month. And he subsequently moved to the United States, and he got a job as a laborer. And within 5 years, the payment in dollars on his mortgage had gone to less than $1 a month from over $100 a month. And his wife said to him, maybe we should just pay it off. Look it up. And he paid off the whole mortgage for less than 1 day's wages because of inflation. So obviously that's not going to happen with people's mortgages right here in the United States, but it is going to get a lot easier to pay those mortgages.
Yeah.
So I don't see a lot of people walking away in this great real estate panic that we had in 2008 and 9.
Yeah, it's not structured quite the same way. So, yeah, well, if maybe I'll have you on again to talk about economics and all that. Now that I know that you're well versed in that as well, so I'll keep an eye out for what you write, and we'll keep in touch. I really appreciate it. Decentralizedrevolution.com/96 for links to your stories and a couple other things we talked about. How can people get in touch with you, or do you want to remain hidden from public view?
I want to remain hidden. No, I as the state party chair in Massachusetts, I cannot remain hidden. If you go to lpofma.org, you can contact me directly through email. Just look up my name. And then also you can continue to read my material at the Libertarian Institute. I plan to continue to publish there. I don't publish a weekly column, but I send Scott Horton stuff as frequently as I can take the time to write it.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. I really appreciate you coming on, Tom.
All right. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
All right, there you have it. I'd like to thank Thomas Eddlem for his time and for stepping up with the Libertarian Party in Massachusetts, and for just a lot of thoughtful articles that he's written over the last few years. We're going to link to his stuff at the LP Massachusetts page and over at the Libertarian Institute. So that's going to be at decentralizedrevolution.com/96. Thanks to my co-producer, Simon Kalpin. Thanks to Dave versus Goliath for all the music you hear on Decentralized Revolution. And of course, thanks to everyone who subscribes to our email list, who gives to Mises PAC over at takehumanaction.com. And thanks to everyone who shares and rates and reviews and subscribes to Decentralized Revolution. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.